That's James's dinner for today. And I'm going to be reviewing this. This got top of the stack. And then the other ones. And looks like James is going to be talking about some James Joyce.
Yeah, different edition.
Yeah, the paperback.
What is this? Yeah, Penguin.
Oh, you have 3 editions of it then.
Yeah, I do.
Okay, well, whatever.
Well, that's the way it goes.
Yeah. I guess they're breaking down. You got to keep replacing them.
Yeah, exactly right. So that one I was reviewing yesterday, not very good binding, but it's partly just the way I use books. But, yeah.
Anyway, his Dark Materials. This got first season, got top of the stack. If you watched Golden Compass and you were really excited about getting to watch it, and then you watched it and you were truly disappointed, as I was, then you might want to watch this. They did a great job on it, and I mean, it's sort of fictional sort of thing. Maybe James will be willing to talk about the real science behind the Northern Lights rather than magical dust. Anyway, but we'll see if James feels like talking about that. But I mean, it's just a fantasy sort of fun thing for kids, and they did a good job. There's some scary stuff. You know, it's a little dark for kids, but often kids are pretty dark. So, speaking of, The Innocents. Boy, this story is interesting. It's kind of supernatural, and depending on your view of things, maybe you think that people can move things with their mind and read people's thoughts or whatever.
Telekinesis, eh?
But
telepathy.
In any case, there's some scary things here that. Oh, I should mention its subtitles. So it got second in the stack. It would have been first if I hadn't gotten through that. But even though it had subtitles, so I watched the whole thing, and I wasn't writing poetry while I was watching this or doing anything else. You know, because subtitles, you've got to devote your attention to it, and it was worth it.
Was this the high tower
scary app? Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
And especially one of the kids is like, oh yeah, that kid's going to be a serial killer, and what do you know, right? So yeah, worth watching. Spooky stuff. Ava, this had a lot of great actors in it. Jessica Chastain, Colin Farrell, John Malkovich, and more. But honestly, it was on, it was off, and that was that. It really didn't. I mean, it's not like it was bad. It was an action adventure sort of thing, and whatever. But I
was that the one where it was just machine guns firing all the time, pretty well, and then people screaming out of it?
Probably. Because I don't think it would. Oh no, it would have been this one. It might have been the bottom one.
That one just seemed to go on and on and on.
Oh, it was so bad.
Sometimes
And
the
it did
screaming
go on
and the machine gun firing overlap.
It says it's only 99 minutes, but it felt like an eternity, I gotta say. Nobody did a good job in this. Gary Oldman was in it, and some other people, but wow, it was so bad. Unwatchable, honestly.
It was unlistenable too. It was going on in the background while I was trying to read.
Unlistenable too.
Dutch.
Yeah, just terrible. I don't even want to talk about that one. It's just that bad. But
it's a motorcycle.
The first 2, you definitely want to watch those 2. So, did you want to talk about the Northern Lights at all?
Well, I don't know what they're topical nowadays because we're going through something like a sunspot maximum. These happen every 11 years. And I'd like to think astronomers like Neil deGrasse Tyson or whatever his name is, et al. What is that? Inter alia?
Maybe I'll just take my ski pants off.
Et alia and others. Inter alia being among others. I figured out it has something to do with the amount of time it takes Jupiter to make a complete orbit around the sun. But who knows? They're a little bit slow on the uptake, always have been. I mean, there would have been astronomers who would have been willing to see Copernicus killed. Of course, Copernicus, I think, waited until the last year of his life. Maybe it was published posthumously, his book on the solar system. When was that? Maybe 1543. And there would have been other official astronomers who've been probably willing to kill Galileo Galilei. That's the thing that I think a lot of people don't understand. They're going, well, the first astronomers were like Copernicus or Kopernik, maybe that was his real name. Copernik, maybe. Polish. Although he really wasn't of Polish ancestry. Like Poland claims him, but he was some...
Yeah, I guess it wouldn't have been Copernicus.
No, that's just a Latinization
funny.
Of his name. I think it's Polish, you tend to accent the second last syllable. So it should be Copernic. But I think they were saying his family came from elsewhere. I don't know if it was German ancestry or Lithuanian or something like that. Koper. The Nick is kind of Slavic. Or German or Danish maybe. Anyway, the vast majority of astronomers, and they existed, would have wanted to go with the old heliocentric system. And it's the same thing nowadays. Like if I started spouting off about the way things maybe really are in the solar system, and Neil deGrasse Tyson, he seems like such a nice guy. We're here, he'd probably be quite rude, but that's the way it goes. I mean, there always have to be people who
So you don't want to
challenge
talk about
authority.
the Northern Lights?
Well, I'm just getting around to it. So when you get solar maximum, in other words, maximum sunspots activity, you tend to have higher activity in with the Northern Lights, Southern Lights as well. So there are
Australis, yeah.
Australis, Borealis. So it's basically the solar wind coming off the sun. They call it a wind, it's not a wind. It should be understood as something that carries sound, right? You don't really get much sound coming through outer space. They say none, but there'd be very, very small amount. And just like they used to say, oh, there's nothing in outer space. What? It's a total vacuum. What? There's a guy in 1937, Alphen, who won the Nobel Prize quite a bit later, about 1971, for work that he repudiated. I think he might not have accepted the Nobel Prize. Now, he's an honest guy. 1937. We'll be talking about him more once I finish going through this series that's recent, starring Jeffrey Rush. As Einstein, we'll be talking more about Alphen. The guy who's the real genius when it comes to the macrocosm, not so much the microcosm, of the 21st century. Not Einstein. Einstein's going around saying outer space is empty. How can light get through it? Oh, it's got to be a particle. So that's what a novel idea. It's so novel. Isaac Newton 200 years before had it. Old-fashioned. So Alphen was saying, this was 22 years after Einstein started getting his papers published. 3 big ones in 1 year, four actually in 1 year, 1905. But Alpha said space is full of electromagnetic activity. Who was right? 20 years after, Alphen didn't have, I don't think, any more, or much more data to work with. So he was kind of like theorizing and stuff like that, just like Einstein's supposed to have been theorizing. So prescient. Look that up in your funking wagons. Prescient. Almost like prophetic. 20 years after Alphen, they start sending stuff. Sputnik, this fellow traveler. That's what I call you nifty lefties out there, your Sputniks. There's still so many of you, like Roger Waters, Sputniks for the Russians, where there's a member of the Green Party saying, don't give the Ukrainians weapons like planes that can be used offensively. Or there have been others saying, Putin's threatening a nuclear war. This could be the end of the world. If you let Putin take over the world, I mean, if you give him the Ukraine just because he's got nuclear weapons and threatening to use them, take over the whole world. Anyway, Alpha, 1937, 20 years before they send Sputnik up, and all of a sudden they're noticing, holy smokes, there's electromagnetic activities happening out here. Wow, who'd have thunk it? Alpha, 20 years before. Crazy, crazy stuff. Now, they had noticed some activity with stars before then. There was some guy in 1955 scanning the skies for stars and looking for radioactivity from the stars. Boop, 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 boop. And he almost blasts his eardrums off. I'm probably exaggerating severely, because he gets this huge, I guess, static from radioactivity from Jupiter. Boom, boom. Who predicted that? Someone predicted it. I believe it was 5 years before. But they weren't checking for it. It was just an accident. Oh, wow! Wow, who would have thunk that? A guy called Immanuel Velikovsky, who's still a
pariah.
Scapegoat. Yeah, pariah. That's an outcast. Pariah for scientists. Now, understand, his astronomy was wrong, but when it comes to Venus, visiting, having a close encounter of the worst kind with the Earth and things like that, but he was right about the catastrophism. 30 years after he published Worlds in Collision, all of a sudden you got some guys, Alvarez, his son is kind of like digging around in Italy, Gubbio, Italy, and Alvarez worked on the Manhattan Project, and they're discovering a layer, not that thick, but a layer of radioactive stuff deposited in Gubbio, Italy. Big trouble is it's found all around the world. Here's the layer, here's the Cretaceous. What do you find in the Cretaceous? You find lots of things, including mammals and fish and birds, but you find dinosaurs. You get this radioactive layer all around the world, not just Gubbio, Italy. You got the tertiary up above. What's important about that? Yeah, you have reptiles, but you don't have dinosaurs. Now, this just could be a correlation, but they're saying there's something that caused both of the things. In other words, the radioactive layer and the dinosaurs disappearing were the same thing. And now they figure it was a meteorite at the world, basically where the Gulf of Mexico impinges on the Yucatan Peninsula.
How does this come back to Northern Lights?
Well, it's this is the really interesting thing about the Northern Lights, is how scientists don't like electrical activity. They're uncomfortable with it.
Oh, I see.
So okay. I'm actually leading up to Einstein.
Okay.
Yeah. So we can get out there and look at the greens and the reds, and that's the solar wind, the little bit of it that actually gets through our own electrical. Like, we live in the electrical pocket of the sun. I don't know where does it have a tail? We haven't been able to discern it, but I'm predicting here, right now, of course, this prediction's been in my mind for a long time. But putting it out there officially, they'll find out the world has the Milky Way. Well, the solar system would have a tail, I presume, and then above and beyond that, the Milky Way, in which our solar system is embedded, will have a tail too. So the sun's tail will face away from Galaxy Central, which is the center of the solar system. I believe it's somewhere around Sagittarius. They'll have a tail pushed away from it by the electrical activity coming off of the center of the solar system. Boom. Pushing it away. The Earth has a tail. The scientists, this went on, I don't know for how long, presumably for decades. People were seeing at midnight, but it'd be other times, but especially at midnight. They'd be looking up into the sky. Here it's roughly a 45-degree angle. They'd be looking up at the sky, well, at a particular time of the year. I mean, it could go this way, that way. They'd be looking at the ecliptic. And they'd be saying, we see a shining there. And this is before Stephen King. We see a shining there. And scientists were generous enough to give it a name, a German name, and that really makes it hot. You know what I'm saying? If you can get a German name for something, that's almost as hot as getting a Latin or a Greek name for something. Gegenschein. Shine is spelled with S-C-H at the beginning, but it's roughly pronounced the same way as shine in English is spelled. There's no E on that. Otherwise, that would be shine in German. And gegen is probably cognate in a certain way with against in English. Gegen means opposite or against shine. Opposite shine is probably a better translation. And what would I'd said at midnight you'd see it up there on the ecliptic. And what would be just the opposite, like 180 degrees removed, going through the center of the Earth, roughly, the sun. And the scientists would go, woohoo, these guys are really imagining things. And then they found out, and this is in my lifetime, might have been in Pauline's lifetime, I'm not sure exactly when they found it. Earth has a tail, Earth has a tail, like a comet. Only it really isn't turned on. Not the way a comet, for most of their existence, almost all the comets, maybe all of them, their tails aren't turned on either. They basically start turning on maybe when they get within the orbit of Jupiter. So most of them go way beyond the orbit of Jupiter, and those are just the ones that are part of the solar system. The ones that you can tell from their paths, they come from outside the solar system. They're the scary ones because you can't predict, how many are going to be coming in. We might run into a comet storm, and one that we don't know of, not a regular visitor or something like that could visit us, and it could be a rather nasty visitation. The last nasty one was around the Younger Dryas. Look that one up in your funking Wagnalls. Younger Dryas. So yeah, we've got Velikovsky's a pariah and all that sort of stuff. He made some mistakes, but he was right about catastrophism. Just the agents for catastrophe in historical times was wrong. Not Venus, but comets. We got too many records. And I've got records from around the world. Not around the world, but from Africa, the full length of Asia, and into Europe. Mm-hmm. How much time?
You have 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
So keep on going.
There we go. From around the world that indicate something happened. We're caused a huge catastrophe. We could the conventional dating system for Mesopotamia, and this is basically a historical record. Fall of the Earthly dynasty. It's called the Lamentation over Ur. But it has a detail. It has a detail. There's a Nuri star that comes with all sorts of plagues, we could almost call them. And the Nuri star, they say, oh, you know, there's so many Babylonian things that we can associate with, you know, modern so-called Western things. For example, the Babylonians had a constellation roughly in a place where we have a constellation we call Leo. Good old Latin name for, in case you didn't know it, I'm sure you do, lion. We inherited these things from, not genetically, but culturally from the Babylonians via the Greeks. And Nuri star, they say, oh, it doesn't exist. And I'm going, you know, maybe we can figure out what the Nuri star was. And so what I said was, maybe what happened was Nuri star was a comet that hit the world. It hits the world, and I suspect it split up in the Earth's gravitational field, based on the stories that I get from places like China and India and Palestine and Egypt and Greece, and the most important one is history from Mesopotamia, indicated that it did split up in Earth's gravitational field, and it was actually named after the constellation in which it appeared. So Velikovsky, back in 1950, the most valuable little piece of research that he did, and he did a lot of valuable research. His conclusions tended to be, you know, the more specific conclusions, particularly when it comes to astronomy, tended to be wrong. But, you know, like Copernicus, when he came up with his system, apparently it doesn't explain the movement of planets quite as well as the old Ptolemaic system. But, you know, like people were just laughing at catastrophism back in 1950 with Worlds in Collision in 50. When was it? 55, I believe, is when he published his book on catastrophic geology. They were laughing about it. It wasn't until 1980 people were going, well, at least not in historic times this sort of stuff happened. But 65 million years ago, the dinosaurs got wiped out, they say, by a meteorite. As I was saying, I suspect it was a comet. Well, the scientists just are uncomfortable. They've always have been with chaos. They're uncomfortable with stuff that isn't physical. They, in other words, solid. And this goes back to a dude called, oh, I was going to say, the Nuri star. Velikovsky, he ran across this passage in Abraham Rockenbach, and he was saying he had a classical source that indicated a comet Typhon at Egypt, and he correlated it with the time of Moses. I don't care about that correlation. That could be just totally made up by Rockenbach or his source. I don't know if we do have classical sources who mention and survive and who mention the comet Typhon. But you know, like I don't care about the correlation with Moses. What happened is, you see, I think it said it had a wrapped head, Rockenbach, wrapped head, the comet, red in color, and it really rocked the world. I think he used that term, and he said, I believe that if it had, or he claimed the sources said that if its visitation or whatever lasted a few more days, it would have ended the world. But the important thing is it says it appeared in the sign of Capricorn. Oh. So I think to the ancients, maybe there were 50 constellations visible. Now we claim there are 88, but that includes the whole world over, including the southern hemisphere. Maybe 50. My chances of getting that constellation right, I figure something like 1 out of 50. That's what the Nuri constellation was. The Mesopotamian Nuri means yoke, like the thing that you chuck over an oxen or two. Capricorn. Oh. Now I'll go into further detail about that. I already have a little bit. Well, we'll get back to
the Northern Lights.
Scientific. Well, I'm using it to get ready for Einstein. Now, I knew a little Japanese professor here in town, University of Lethbridge, He actually trained with a dude called Tomonaga, Nobel Prize winner, back in Japan. I remember one time talking to him about atoms. So I drew a diagram of atoms, the way I conceived of them, and I drew close packing, like where they were, like if you put coins down, you can put them all together, right? And you make patterns. You can put them into squares, or you can put them into a closer packing would be to put them into kind of like triangle. And what he did was he corrected me. He said, no, you should put points here. And he just, like I was going, I know where you're going from. Where you're coming from. I know where you're going with that. But, you couldn't go with the flow. I couldn't conceive of atoms as actually having extension. There were little points to it. This goes back to a dude, Democritus, Greek dude, a long time ago, well before Christ, who had this idea of atoms. Tom means to cut. Boom! In Greek. Means not cut. You can't cut an atom. Now, we still revere Democritus and folks that came after them, one of them being Lucretius. And, for coming up with this idea of atom. It isn't a great idea. Because we've cut atoms down into neutrons, protons, electrons. They claim to have cut them down to quarks, although I don't know if they've actually been able to perceive a quark, other than in their minds or something like that. Talking about physicists.
Yeah. Still a thought experiment, you think?
No, they come up with all sorts of equations. It's amazing. Ever since Einstein, Newton was a bad influence, but ever since Einstein, it's just like, I've got this idea. Let's build this world using a bunch of equations. I'm just going to fill up a blackboard and voila. There we have Ecce. We've got reality there for you. Feast your eyes on that. So it gets down to a hatred of, see, the way I was conceiving the atoms is they kind of exist of there's an electromagnetic field around them, doesn't it? And those things would go until they're touching another, and then another, and another. So physicists, scientists in general, but physicists in particular, have a problem. They like dealing with points and stuff like that. Points, you can make a geometric kind of little array of things and so on and so forth. They're not that good with extension. And it gets them in trouble with electricity. So they just don't like electricity. They don't. Einstein couldn't conceive of outer space being full of electromagnetic activity. Just couldn't conceive of it. He's just going with light. He's saying, okay, there's no medium for light out there in the air, or out there in outer space, and so on and so on. We'll be talking more about it. Maybe about the Northern Lights too. Out of time?
30 seconds, wrap it up.
30 seconds. Well, just stay tuned. If you're a physicist, get ready to be cussing and swearing to yourself. I'm sure you'll want to be cussing and swearing on the internet and stuff like that. Go for it. I live on the shoulder of someone else said this, on the shoulders of runts, and you're there.